Buick presents the Sleek Centurion.
With the rear wheel steering the streamlined car, it can turn as though fixed to a pivot.
They were built with bold ideas, bizarre shapes, and the kind of confidence that only comes from not caring what anyone thinks. These are the weirdest American old cars you have never seen. The 1933 Dymaxion car was not just a car. It was a rolling question mark that dared the world to rethink everything. Designed by Buckminster Fuller, the futurist best known for inventing the geodesic dome, the Dymaxion was a teardrop-shaped, three-wheeled vehicle with one foot in engineering and the other in science fiction. It could seat 11 passengers, ran on a Ford flathead V8 engine, and was intended seriously to eventually fly. Yes, fly. The word Dymaxion itself was a mashup of dynamic, maximum, and tension, which perfectly described the feeling you got just watching it try to turn. The car had rear-wheel steering, which made parking easier in theory but turned high-speed driving into an absolute gamble. At over 20 feet long and narrower than most city cars, it was more like a land submarine than anything else. One tragic accident at the 1933 Chicago Century of Progress exhibition spelled doom for the project, though the cause was likely driver error. Still, the public perception was enough. Only 3 Dymaxions were built. One remains today. It looks like something Flash Gordon would drive to the office, and honestly, that is part of its magic. The Dymaxion was not practical, it was not safe, and it certainly was not ready, but it was wildly, wonderfully weird in all the right ways. The 1948 Tucker 48 was not just weird, it was dangerously ahead of its time, and that may have been its downfall. Nicknamed the Tucker Torpedo, this sleek, rear-engine sedan came from the mind of Preston Tucker, a man who believed the post-war car market was ready for revolution. At first glance, it looked like a spaceship, low-slung, long, and wrapped in aerodynamic curves. But the weirdest and most brilliant feature was dead center, a third headlight mounted in the middle of the hood that turned with the steering wheel. They called it the Cyclops Eye. It gave the car a strange, bug-eyed stare that turned heads and sparked imagination. Beneath the sleek body, the Tucker was filled with innovations: seat belts, a roll bar, a pop-out windshield, and a rear-mounted engine borrowed from a helicopter. Yes, a helicopter. But in 1948, these safety features were seen as odd, even suspicious. The big 3 automakers felt threatened, and a combination of government pressure, bad press, and financial sabotage killed the company after only 51 cars were built. Today, the Tucker 48 is a legend, not just for its looks, but for what it dared to offer. A car that was weird, bold, and years ahead of what Detroit was ready to build. The 1963 Chrysler turbine car was the closest America ever came to strapping jet engines to daily drivers, and it worked. Kind of. With bodywork that looked like a mid-century dream and a turbine engine that could run on kerosene, diesel, perfume, and yes, even tequila. This machine pushed the boundary between concept and street car. Chrysler built 55 of them and loaned them to carefully selected families across the country. For 1 year, everyday people drove what sounded like fighter jets through quiet suburban neighborhoods. The turbine engine revved smoothly and needed no radiator, no antifreeze, and almost no oil changes. But there were quirks. The acceleration had a noticeable lag. The exhaust ran so hot it could melt plastic garbage cans if you backed in too close. And although it could sip from nearly any liquid fuel, getting replacement parts was next to impossible. The body was all hand-built by Ghia in Italy, adding to the cost and mystique. Chrysler eventually recalled nearly all of them and destroyed most, likely to avoid import taxes or future liability. Only a few survived, mostly tucked away in museums. The turbine car was sleek, alien, and completely unforgettable. It was not just a car, it was a jet-powered experiment in American ambition. The 1935 Stout Scarab looked like a rolling beetle and drove like an idea whose time never came. Designed by William Bushnell Stout, this strange, bloated pod was often called the first minivan, decades before minivans were a thing. Its rounded Art Deco body looked like it had been sculpted by a cartoonist with a soft spot for streamlining. But the weirdness was not just skin deep. It had a rear-mounted Ford V8 engine, unibody construction, and an interior that could be reconfigured with movable chairs, like a rolling living room. No joke. Some versions even had a fold-out table in the middle. Stout believed the car should be more than just transportation. He thought it should be a mobile lounge, a social space, a tool for life. But at a price of $5,000 in the middle of the Great Depression, few buyers were willing to roll that kind of dice. Fewer than 10 were made, and even fewer exist today. The Stout Scarab never caught on, but it left a mark. Every time you see a modern minivan with sliding seats, a rear engine, or a spacious cabin, you are seeing an echo of Stout's vision. It was strange, it was expensive, but it was also way ahead of the curve. The 1959 Cadillac Cyclone looked like it had been beamed down from another planet, and honestly, that was the point. It was never meant for production. It was a concept car designed to show off the future as imagined by the jet age. Long, sleek, and absolutely bonkers. The front end had twin nose cones that looked like missiles, and the whole car rode low like a cruise missile on wheels. But the weirdest touch was the transparent bubble canopy that slid forward to open, like something from a fighter jet. Want more sci-fi? The Cyclone came with radar-based collision avoidance, mounted in those nose cones. That is right. In 1959, Cadillac was already dreaming about driver assistance tech. The interior was just as wild, featuring automatic climate controls, aircraft-inspired toggle switches, and seats covered in metallic silver. But like most concept cars, the Cyclone was too ambitious, too weird, and far too expensive to ever make it to the showroom. Only one was ever built, and it still exists today, preserved in GM's heritage collection like a fossil from a future that never arrived. The Cyclone was not just a design. It was a prophecy. One part spaceship, one part Cadillac, and all parts weird. The 1956 Buick Centurion was the kind of car that made you pause and say, "Wait, what am I looking at?" With its fire red and white fiberglass body, bubble canopy, and sci-fi proportions, it looked like something that should be hovering, not rolling. But buried in that bold styling was something truly unique. A rear-mounted camera instead of a rear-view mirror. Yes, in 1956, Buick put a camera in the back of a car and fed the video to a screen in the dashboard. It was a concept feature that would not become reality in production cars for another 50 years. The interior was equally futuristic, with push-button controls, wraparound seating, and a dash that seemed more spaceship than sedan. The Centurion also ditched the usual rear pillars, giving it an airy, glass-filled feel that earned it serious attention at auto shows. Of course, the fiberglass body made mass production a no-go, and while the camera was a marvel, the technology just was not ready. Still, the 1956 Centurion proved Buick was not afraid to think way outside the box. It was not built to be practical. It was built to make people believe the future was closer than they thought, and for one brief, wild moment, it did exactly that. The 1970 AMC Gremlin was born with a buzz cut and a bad attitude, and that was exactly the point. Designed to be AMC's no-nonsense answer to rising fuel prices and a market craving smaller cars, the Gremlin arrived by chopping off the back end of an AMC Hornet. Literally. The result was a stubby, almost cartoonish hatchback that looked unfinished to some and brilliantly bold to others. It had a long hood, short rear, and an abrupt profile that turned heads whether you wanted it to or not. But the weirdness did not stop at the shape. You could option it with a 6-cylinder or a V8 engine, giving it a strange split identity, part economy car, part muscle brat. The interior was simple, cramped, and full of hard plastic, but it was cheap, it was efficient, and it was weird enough to develop its own loyal following. AMC leaned into the oddball vibe, even running ads that joked about the car's unusual design. While critics panned it, drivers loved its honesty. It never pretended to be anything but itself. The Gremlin was AMC saying, "We are not like the others," and in doing so, they created one of the most distinct silhouettes of the 1970s. The 1975 AMC Pacer looked like it had been designed by someone who started with a fishbowl and worked backward. Nearly half of the car's surface area was glass, giving it the nickname the Flying Fishbowl. Its bulbous shape, wide stance, and massive windows gave it an almost aquatic feel, as if it belonged underwater instead of the open road. AMC marketed it as the first wide small car, a contradiction that somehow made perfect sense in the era of bell-bottoms and disco. The front passenger door was longer than the driver's, intended to make rear seat access easier. The dash was deep and curved, and the whole car seemed like it was smiling awkwardly at the world. Under the hood, it offered small six-cylinder engines and, in later years, a few underpowered V8s. It was not fast, it was not nimble, but it was unique. People either loved it or mocked it, and the design quickly became dated in a decade already full of questionable fashion. Yet despite the ridicule, the Pacer has become a cult classic. It is weird, it is lovable, and it perfectly captures a moment when American cars were still trying to figure out what small really meant. The 1982 Dodge Rampage was what happened when someone decided a car should also be a truck, but not too much of either. It looked like a compact coupe from the front, with front-wheel drive and all the manners of a commuter car. But in the back, a small truck bed that could haul mulch, lumber, or a few cinder blocks if you did not mind scraping the shocks. It was Dodge's attempt to create a car-truck hybrid, following the path blazed by the Ford Ranchero and Chevrolet El Camino, but on a smaller, more modest scale. The Rampage could fit in tight parking spots, cruise the highway, and still carry a lawnmower on Saturday morning. But its awkward size and identity left it stranded between segments. Truck buyers thought it was too soft. Car buyers thought it was too rugged. Dodge only made it for 3 model years, and it quietly disappeared by 1984. But in hindsight, the Rampage was ahead of its time, an early answer to the crossover question before anyone was even asking it. It was not fast, it was not strong, but it was clever, oddly charming, and unmistakably weird. The 1975 Bricklin SV1 looked like a DeLorean with even more attitude, and just as much baggage. Built by Malcolm Bricklin in Canada, it was a fiberglass-bodied sports car with pop-up headlights and dramatic gull-wing doors. But the real twist? It was designed as a safety vehicle, hence the SV in its name. It came with big, energy-absorbing bumpers, a reinforced roll cage, and a body engineered to survive crashes better than most sports cars of its day. But while safety was the message, the styling screamed drama. The car came in bold, bright colors, no muted tones allowed, and those gull-wing doors drew attention even when parked. Under the hood, it packed either an AMC or Ford V8 depending on the year, but performance never quite lived up to the looks. Worse, the doors were heavy, and the hydraulic system that lifted them was prone to failure, leaving unlucky drivers trapped inside. Production issues, supply shortages, and financial chaos meant only about 2,800 cars were made before the company collapsed. Today, the Bricklin SV1 is a symbol of bold ideas colliding with real-world limitations. It tried to be everything: fast, safe, stylish, different, and in its strange way, it actually was. The 1981 DeLorean DMC-12 looked like the future dressed in stainless steel, and for a moment it was. Designed by John DeLorean and built in Northern Ireland, the DMC-12 featured an angular brushed metal body and upward-swinging gull-wing doors that turned every parking lot into a movie set. And then, of course, there was the movie. Back to the Future immortalized the DeLorean as a time machine, forever linking its name to cinematic legend. But off-screen, the car had issues. The underpowered Renault-sourced V6 made acceleration feel sluggish, and its build quality was plagued by inconsistent panel gaps and frequent electrical problems. The futuristic exterior clashed with a dated economy-grade interior. Still, people loved it, for its looks, for its daring, and for what it tried to be. It was not practical, it was not fast, but it was unforgettable. Only about 9,000 were made before the company went bankrupt, and many were never completed. Today, the DeLorean is a symbol of what happens when ambition collides with reality. It did not change the world, but it changed the way people thought about cars. No other vehicle quite captured the feeling of stepping into something from tomorrow. The 1957 Chevrolet El Morocco was part Bel Air, part Cadillac, and all ambition. Conceived by Canadian entrepreneur Reuben Allender, the El Morocco was a hand-built attempt to turn Chevrolet's popular Bel Air into something that looked and felt more like a luxury El Dorado. He wanted to offer middle-class drivers a taste of Cadillac class without the Cadillac price. The changes were subtle but effective. Custom fins, Cadillac-style grille inserts, unique badging, and extra chrome in all the right places. Even the wheel covers mimicked Cadillacs. But under the flash, it was still very much a Bel Air, with the same engine options, the same chassis, and the same familiar ride. Allender built fewer than 30 El Moroccos in 1957, following an even smaller run in 1956. The price was high, too high for most Chevrolet buyers, and not quite prestigious enough for luxury car shoppers. It landed in a no-man's land of identity. Still, for those who bought it, the El Morocco offered something rare: individuality. Today, it is one of the rarest Chevrolets of the 1950s, a stylish footnote in the history of American customization. It did not start a trend, but it sure made one. The 1980 AMC Eagle was not flashy. It was not fast, but it might have been one of the most important American cars no one remembers. AMC took a standard passenger car and gave it full-time four-wheel drive, something no other American automaker had done before. The result? A rugged, practical vehicle with sedan-like comfort and light off-road capability. It was the birth of the crossover decades before anyone used the word. The Eagle came as a wagon, a sedan, and even a coupe. It had higher ground clearance, a beefy suspension, and chunky tires, all paired with a unibody frame and independent front suspension. While it lacked the brute strength of a traditional truck, it could handle dirt roads, snow, and mild trails with surprising ease. Inside, it was modest, simple dash, basic upholstery, no nonsense. But that was the charm. It was practical, adaptable, and built for the kind of driver who cared more about getting there than arriving in style. AMC sold enough to keep it going for a few years, but it never gained the spotlight it deserved. Today, the Eagle is recognized as a pioneer, the weird little car that came before the craze and proved America could build something different and useful. The 1971 Ford Pinto will always be remembered, but not for the reasons Ford hoped. Introduced as a small, affordable car to compete with Japanese imports, the Pinto had a compact body, a lightweight design, and styling that was modest but modern. On paper, it looked like a winner. It was simple, fuel-efficient, and offered in multiple trims and body styles. But hidden behind its economy car charm was a design flaw that would define its legacy: the placement of the fuel tank. Positioned just behind the rear axle, the tank was vulnerable in rear-end collisions. Worse, in some cases, it could rupture and cause fires. The controversy exploded when internal documents revealed Ford had calculated the cost of lawsuits against the cost of redesigning the tank and chose the cheaper path. Still, the Pinto sold well. Over 3 million units hit the road, driven by budget-conscious buyers who appreciated its size and price. The car itself was not inherently bad, and many owners had years of problem-free driving. But the stigma stuck. Today, the Pinto is a symbol of corporate corner-cutting and public backlash, an example of how a single design choice can overshadow everything else. Weird? Yes. Infamous? Even more so. The 1960 Plymouth XNR was one of the most striking concept cars to ever roll out of Detroit because it refused to play by any of the rules. Designed by the legendary Virgil Exner, the XNR was named after him, and it looked like a machine pulled straight from a comic book. Asymmetrical from front to back, the car featured a single-seat cockpit on the driver's side, offset by a large fin that rose boldly behind the headrest. There was no matching passenger seat, at least not one that matched in height or focus. The design was intentionally lopsided, unapologetically dramatic, and unlike anything else seen before or since. Under the sculpted hood was a slant-6 engine tuned for performance, because this was not just a pretty face. The XNR was meant to perform. But as with many concept cars, it was too radical for production. The world was not ready. After a brief tour of the show circuit, the car was shipped overseas to avoid destruction. It eventually surfaced in the Middle East, and years later was fully restored by a collector who saw its brilliance. Today, it is one of one, a piece of rolling sculpture. The XNR was not designed to fit in. It was built to stand alone, forever weird and forever unforgettable. The 1973 Chevrolet Chevelle Laguna Estate was a station wagon with muscle car dreams, and the result was one of the strangest blends of performance and practicality ever made. Built on the colonnade body style, the Laguna Estate borrowed styling cues from Chevrolet's NASCAR-inspired Laguna Coupe, but stretched them into a long-roof family hauler. Up front, it had a sloped nose and aerodynamic bumper that hinted at speed, while the rear was all wagon, roomy, functional, and square enough to carry half your garage. You could get it with rally wheels, vinyl wood grain siding, and even a V8 engine that gave it real muscle. The interior offered plenty of space with bench or bucket seats and enough room in the cargo area for both groceries and camping gear. But the Laguna Estate never found its audience. Muscle car fans thought it was too soft. Wagon lovers thought it was trying too hard. It existed in a weird middle space, cool in theory, confusing in execution. Production numbers were modest, and by the late 70s, the model quietly faded out. Today, it is a rare sight and an even rarer collectible. The Chevelle Laguna Estate was Chevrolet's attempt to blend brawn and family life, and it did so with weird, wonderful confidence. The 1958 Ford Edsel was supposed to be the car of the future. Instead, it became the poster child for automotive failure and weirdness. Ford poured millions into the Edsel brand, hoping to create a premium vehicle that slotted between its Mercury and Lincoln divisions. What rolled off the assembly line, however, was a strange blend of design ambition and market confusion. The front grille looked like a horse collar, or worse, depending on who you asked. The push-button transmission was mounted in the steering wheel hub. The marketing was over the top, the pricing was inconsistent, and the economy was heading into a slump. But beneath the chaos, the Edsel had some interesting ideas. Its self-adjusting brakes, warning lights, and powerful engines were genuinely advanced for the time. The problem? Nobody could figure out what it was supposed to be. The name Edsel itself became a punchline. By 1960, the experiment was over, and Ford had pulled the plug. Fewer than 110,000 Edsels were sold, and yet its legacy lives on. Not just as a failure, but as a symbol of what happens when big dreams meet bad timing. The Edsel was weird, bold, and unforgettable for all the wrong reasons. The 1961 Amphicar model. 770 was the kind of car that turned heads on the road and made jaws drop at the boat ramp. It was part car, part boat, and fully surreal. Built in Germany and imported to the United States, the Amphicar featured a waterproof body, dual rear propellers, and a bilge pump to keep the water out once you drove it straight into the lake. On land, it drove like a modest compact. Nothing special in terms of speed or handling. But once you hit the shore, you could twist a lever, engage the props, and cruise across the water at a leisurely 7 miles per hour. It was the world's only mass-produced amphibious car. The novelty was undeniable. Presidents rode in them, celebrities owned them. And yet, the car had its challenges. Maintenance was tricky, sealing systems could fail, and it was never particularly fast or powerful in either environment. Only about 4,000 were built between 1961 and 1968. Most were sold in the United States. Today, surviving Amphicars are collector's gold, living proof that, at least once, someone thought the future meant driving straight off the dock and into the water. Weird? Absolutely. And all the more lovable for it. The 1954 Kaiser Darren was a car that looked like it had been sculpted from a daydream, and in many ways it had. Designed by Howard "Dutch" Darren, it was America's first production fiberglass sports car, beating the Corvette to market by a hair. Its body was long, low, and impossibly smooth, with a unique grille that looked like puckered lips caught mid-whistle. But the real showstopper? The sliding doors. Instead of swinging open, the doors slid forward into the front fenders, disappearing completely like a magic trick. Under the hood was a modest Willys F-head engine, not exactly a powerhouse, but it moved the featherlight body with ease. The Darren came with a 3-position convertible top and swooping curves that made it look fast even while parked. Unfortunately, it was also expensive, and Kaiser was already struggling. Only 435 were ever made. Today, it is considered one of the most unique and collectible American cars of the 1950s. The Darren was not built to be practical. It was built to be different. And in that mission, it succeeded beautifully. A rolling sculpture, a conversation starter, and one of the weirdest, most elegant flukes in automotive history. The 1974 Volkswagen thing looked like something a kid might draw with a ruler and a crayon, and that was exactly its charm. Born from military roots, it was built for toughness, not beauty. With its flat body panels, removable doors, fold-down windshield, and no-nonsense air-cooled engine tucked in the back, it wasn't trying to impress anyone at the country club. But that's what made it special. It found its tribe among surfers, campers, and people who wanted their car to feel like a rolling canteen with a license plate. You could hose out the floors, throw gear in the back, and still have room for a dog, a cooler, and 2 muddy friends. It wasn't fast, but it could go almost anywhere, and it made every trip feel like an adventure. And the name? The Thing. As if even Volkswagen couldn't quite explain it, it was weird, wonderful, and strangely liberating. People who drove one weren't looking for comfort or class, they were after freedom. You could drive it to the beach barefoot, leave it unlocked, and not worry about a thing. Because the Thing didn't care what anyone thought, and that attitude was what made it so unforgettable. The 1962 Studebaker Avanti was a last-ditch gamble from a company on the brink, and boy, did it go out swinging. Wrapped in a curvy fiberglass body that looked like it belonged in an art gallery more than a showroom, the Avanti was Studebaker's desperate play for relevance. It had no front grille. Instead, a subtle air intake sat below the bumper, giving it a smooth, otherworldly face. The long hood, short rear deck, and Coke bottle curves were unlike anything else on the road. And under that sculpted skin, some serious muscle. With the optional R2 supercharged V8 engine, the Avanti could top 150 miles per hour, making it the fastest American production car of its day. But the weirdness was more than skin deep. The dash was aircraft-inspired, the seats low and tight, and the overall vibe was part sports car, part science experiment. Sadly, production delays and Studebaker's fading reputation doomed it from the start. Dealers got cars late, parts were hard to source, and marketing never quite explained what it was. Only a few thousand were made before Studebaker shuttered production in 1963. But the Avanti refused to die. It was resurrected multiple times by independent builders over the decades. Today, it's a beloved oddball, a symbol of what happens when a company throws everything at the wall and actually creates something unforgettable. The 1969 Chevrolet Astro 3 looked less like a car and more like something NASA misplaced. This 3-wheeled gas turbine concept car featured a low-slung, bullet-shaped body and a jet fighter-style canopy that flipped forward to reveal a single cockpit-style seat. You did not drive it, you piloted it. There was no traditional steering wheel. Instead, joystick controls gave the driver a feel more like guiding a spacecraft than cruising Main Street. The Astro 3 was not designed for production. It was a rolling laboratory meant to showcase futuristic technology and ideas. And in that, it succeeded brilliantly. The turbine engine sat behind the driver, delivering smooth, whirring power that felt more like flying than driving. The nose was long and sharp. The rear was truncated and vented. The whole thing rode on 2 front wheels and a single rear wheel tucked neatly under the fuselage. It was light years away from the family sedans people actually drove, but that was the point. Chevrolet wanted to push boundaries, and the Astro 3 was as far out as they got. It never saw a factory line, but it toured car shows and fairs, dazzling kids and confusing adults. It was weird. It was impractical. But it was also a bold vision of tomorrow, proof that sometimes the wildest ideas do not need to go anywhere to make a lasting impression. The 1960 Ford Levacar Mach. I was not just weird, it was full-on science fiction. Instead of wheels, it hovered. That is right. This one-man donut-shaped prototype floated on a cushion of air, like a personal hovercraft dreamed up during the golden age of atomic optimism. Ford engineers wanted to leap past the car entirely. The Levacar Mach 1 was meant to glide over roads with no friction, no tires, and no rules. Propulsion came from compressed air jets that created lift beneath the circular platform. You sat in the middle, cross-legged like a pilot in a flying saucer, with your hands gripping joystick controls. The design was inspired by the idea that America's future would be airborne, and the Levacar was going to be the way to get there. But the problems were immediate. It only worked on perfectly flat surfaces, like polished concrete. Steering was unpredictable. It could not climb hills or stop easily. And let's be honest, nobody knew how to regulate a hovercar in traffic. Ford shelved the idea before it got anywhere near production, but it remains one of the strangest and most ambitious vehicle concepts ever built. It was not about selling a product, it was about chasing a dream. The 1955 Dodge La Femme was a car designed for women, or at least what 1950s executives thought women wanted. And it was weird, really weird. Based on the Dodge Custom Royal Lancer, the La Femme came in two-tone shades of pink and white and featured floral fabric interiors. But it was not just the color scheme that made it strange. It came with a matching purse, umbrella, lipstick case, and even a raincoat, all in coordinated pink. These accessories were stored in a special compartment built into the back of the front passenger seat. Dodge marketed it as a car by women for women, even though no women were on the design team. The La Femme was supposed to tap into the growing post-war female market. Instead, it became a curiosity. Sales were abysmal. Women drivers wanted safety, reliability, and practicality, not pink paint and a built-in compact. The concept returned in 1956 with even more coordinated accessories and slightly different styling, but it still failed to attract buyers. Only a few thousand were produced, and the model disappeared quietly. The 1974 Sebring Vanguard city car looked like someone took a refrigerator, tipped it onto four wheels, and gave it a windshield. Built during the oil crisis, this electric car was one of the earliest attempts to create a commuter-friendly, gas-free vehicle in America. But it was odd. Really odd. The body was made of plastic, the roof was flat, and the whole thing had the design language of a traffic cone. It was tiny, barely over 8 feet long, and ran on a bank of lead-acid batteries that gave it a top speed of about 35 miles per hour. Charging took 8 hours, and you were not going far. Most models had a range of 40 miles on a good day. There was no air conditioning, no power steering, and safety? Let us just say, it was not a top priority. But people bought them. In fact, for a short time in the mid-70s, the city car was the most successful electric vehicle in America. It was weird, slow, and incredibly basic, but it was also a pioneer. Having a gas tank mounted in the rear seems risky enough, but some older cars, especially in the 1930s and 1940s, had something even worse: a front-mounted fuel tank. Yes, the gas tank was positioned near the front bumper, just behind the grille or tucked beneath the engine compartment. It might have made refueling easier in some cases, but it created a massive explosion risk in any frontal collision. The moment the front end crumpled in a crash, fuel lines could rupture and pour gasoline near hot engine parts or exposed wiring. In some documented cases, even low-speed accidents turned deadly because of fuel leaks and resulting fires. There was also the issue of heat. Having gallons of gasoline sitting next to an engine already running hot made for a dangerous combination, especially in summer traffic or long trips. Engineers initially overlooked the hazard, focusing more on balance and packaging than crash survivability. But as cars got faster and roadways more crowded, the danger became impossible to ignore. Gradually, the industry shifted fuel tanks toward the rear and then to safer mid-body positions. Safety regulations in the 1960s and 1970s finally outlawed front-mounted tanks in passenger vehicles. The 1970 Plymouth Hemi Cuda convertible was muscle with the top down, and almost no one ever got to drive one. Only 14 were built, and each one packed a 426 Hemi engine under the hood, making it as loud and wild as it looked. Painted in high-impact colors with bold stripes and shaker hoods, these cars were rolling declarations of horsepower and attitude. But what really made it rare was the combination. A convertible body paired with one of the most aggressive engines ever offered in a street car. Most buyers shied away from the price, the insurance, or the sheer madness of it. But for those 14 brave souls, they got something unforgettable. It was not a quiet cruiser. It was not practical. It was a fire-breathing beast that just happened to let the sky in. Inside, you got rally gauges, wood trim, and bucket seats. Comfort, yes, but only if you could handle the roar. Today, the Hemi Cuda convertible is one of the most valuable muscle cars in existence. It is not just rare, it is mythical. Every one of those 14 cars tells a story about the limits of what Detroit was willing to build, even if just for a moment. The 1948 Tucker 48, also known as the Tucker Torpedo, looked like it came from a future we never quite reached. Its sleek teardrop body was decades ahead of its time, with curves that flowed like water and a center-mounted third headlight that turned with the steering wheel. Just standing next to it felt like being part of a science fiction story. Built by visionary Preston Tucker, this car was not just beautiful, it was revolutionary. It had a rear-mounted engine, pop-out safety windshields, and a padded dashboard, all in an era when most cars were still slabs of metal with wheels. But the most striking thing was how it looked. Low, long, and impossibly smooth, the Tucker 48 made every other car on the road seem outdated. Only 51 were ever built before the company was crushed by financial scandal and corporate resistance. But those 51 cars? They became legends. Not because of what they were, but because of what they could have been. The Tucker was beauty wrapped in bravery, a symbol of ambition that flew too close to the sun. And for collectors and dreamers alike, it still represents one of the boldest, most beautiful what-ifs in automotive history. The 1971 Chevrolet Monte Carlo SS454 was the kind of car that blended power and poise in a way few others dared. It looked elegant, it looked calm. But deep underneath the long hood and polished trim sat a fire-breathing 454 cubic-inch V8, the same engine that powered some of Chevrolet's most brutal drag strip legends. This car did not need wild decals or spoiler kits to make its point. It was a gentleman's brawler. The Monte Carlo SS could roll silently through city streets, soaking up bumps with soft suspension and letting the driver recline in comfort. But one twitch of the accelerator, and everything changed. The engine woke up with a growl. The tires bit into the pavement. The plush personal luxury coupe became a full-fledged muscle machine, capable of shoving you back into your seat and leaving the competition behind. The SS package added heavy-duty suspension, beefier brakes, and a tighter feel overall. But it still maintained that smooth, upscale experience. It was a car for drivers who wanted the best of both worlds. Today, the Monte Carlo SS 454 is remembered for its dual identity: classy on the outside, chaos under the hood. It was the kind of car you could take to a formal event, then leave in a cloud of smoke and roaring exhaust. It was style, power, and surprise, all rolled into one unforgettable machine. The 1985 Yugo GF made headlines as the cheapest new car in America. But cheap came with a price, and the Yugo paid dearly. Built in the former Yugoslavia and imported with bold promises, it was meant to give cost-conscious buyers an entry into car ownership. But almost everything about the Yugo felt like a compromise too far. The engine was noisy, the transmission clunky, and interior trim came loose with the slightest touch. Reviewers described it as toy-like, unstable, and barely roadworthy. On the highway, it struggled to keep up. On hills, it begged for mercy. Repairs were frequent and frustrating, and many new owners regretted the purchase before their first oil change. It became a late-night comedy punchline and the butt of every bad car joke for decades. Some cars fade into obscurity. The Yugo earned infamy. It proved that cutting costs without care leads to one destination: failure. Believe it or not, for years the passenger side mirror was not standard equipment. That is right. Many cars rolled off the lot with just one side mirror, usually mounted on the driver's door. No second mirror, no symmetry, and definitely no blind spot awareness. The logic at the time was that a driver could simply turn their head to check the right side. But on highways, in traffic, or while merging, that was far from safe. Changing lanes became an educated guess. Some drivers added aftermarket mirrors, others stuck with the single view and hoped for the best. This was especially dangerous in wide cars or low-slung models where visibility was already limited. Rear-view mirrors helped, but they only told part of the story. It was not until the 1980s that passenger-side mirrors became common, and even then, they were sometimes an extra cost option. Safety advocates pushed for their inclusion, citing accidents caused by blind spots and limited rear visibility. Eventually, regulations caught up, and now dual side mirrors are required by law in most countries. Today, many cars come with blind spot monitoring, lane change alerts, and wide-angle glass. But for decades, half the rear view was missing, and nobody thought twice about it. The 1963 Studebaker Avanti R2 was not just ahead of its time. It felt like it came from a different decade entirely. With its sleek fiberglass body, no front grille, and bullet-like stance, the Avanti looked more like a European concept car than something born in Indiana. The R2 variant took things further. It featured a supercharged V8 engine that pushed out over 280 horsepower, making it one of the fastest production cars in America at the time. It could hit 100 miles per hour with ease and topped out well beyond. But this was not just about speed. Studebaker packed the Avanti with innovation: front disc brakes, built-in roll bar, and a safety-minded interior long before those were industry norms. It was a bold move for a company struggling to stay afloat. The Avanti was meant to save Studebaker. Instead, it became a cult classic. Fewer than 1,000 R2 units were built before production ended. Today, it stands as a reminder of what American design could be when it was willing to take a risk. The Avanti R2 may not have changed the industry, but it absolutely changed the conversation. The 1955 Ford Thunderbird was Ford's glamorous answer to European roadsters, but with an unmistakably American attitude. It had a low-slung body, round taillights, and a wide grille that grinned like it had nothing to prove. Where other cars tried to scream, the Thunderbird purred. Its proportions were just right: long hood, short deck, and curves in all the right places. It came with a removable fiberglass hardtop that looked like it had been styled by a Hollywood set designer, complete with those signature porthole windows introduced the following year. Inside, it was a personal cockpit, padded in leather and chrome with simple round dials and a steering wheel that looked like a work of art. The Thunderbird was never about brute force. It was about charm, about elegance. It cruised rather than raced, preferring a coastal drive to a drag strip. And that was its magic. It offered American buyers a taste of luxury, freedom, and flair at a time when the country was hitting its cultural stride. The 1955 Thunderbird became an icon almost instantly, not because it was the loudest car on the road, but because it whispered sophistication with every mile. The 1970 Chevrolet Chevelle SS 454 was not just a muscle car. It was a factory-built monster that growled with authority the second you touched the gas. At the heart of it was the LS6 engine, a big block brute that delivered 450 horsepower straight off the assembly line. That was unheard of at the time. It was raw, brutal torque packed into a mid-sized body that looked like it was always in motion, even when parked. The dual stripes, the cowl induction hood, and the rumble from those chrome-tipped exhaust pipes made the Chevelle impossible to ignore. It was the kind of car that made your palms sweat just sitting in the driver's seat. Quarter-mile times were legendary, and this car did not care about finesse, it was about dominance. People who drove it felt like kings, and those who lined up next to it at a red light, they usually regretted it. The Chevelle SS454 was the kind of car you saved all summer to buy, all winter to fix, and never stopped bragging about. It represented the peak of American muscle, before the rules changed and the power faded. Today, it is not just missed, it is worshipped. The 1982 Cadillac Cimarron was supposed to help Cadillac move into the compact market, but instead it became the gold standard for automotive failure. On the surface, it wore the Cadillac badge proudly, but underneath, it was little more than a Chevrolet Cavalier in a tuxedo. The engine was a basic four-cylinder that whined more than it roared. The interior was cramped, with hard plastics and trim that looked borrowed from a rental car. The performance was underwhelming, especially for a brand that once set the standard for American luxury. And yet, the price tag soared because of the nameplate. Buyers expecting Cadillac smoothness, power, and prestige were handed a dressed-up economy car with barely any of the brand's signature refinement. Enthusiasts were outraged, critics pounced. The press called it lazy, cynical, and embarrassing. Cadillac's reputation took a major hit, and General Motors scrambled to justify the move. Marketing tried to spin it as European-inspired, but no one was buying it, figuratively or literally. The Cimarron sold poorly, was quietly dropped, and remains a cautionary tale. You cannot fake luxury, not with stitching, not with chrome, and definitely not with a badge. Sometimes, a legacy is not built, it is dismantled. The Chevrolet Vega rolled out with bold dreams. It was meant to be a compact car for a new era, lightweight, efficient, stylish. And it had one headline feature, an aluminum engine that was supposed to revolutionize small car performance. But that engine turned out to be its undoing. It overheated, it warped, it failed. For many drivers, the Vega started as a promise and ended as a cautionary tale. Kids in the back seat might remember the smell of coolant more than the family vacations. Underneath its slick styling, the Vega simply was not built to last. Rust showed up like an uninvited guest. Head gaskets blew out without warning. What was supposed to be GM's forward-thinking marvel became a repair shop regular. Still, if you grew up in the 1970s, chances are you saw plenty of them on the road because they sold fast. Everyone knew someone who had a Vega, maybe your neighbor, maybe your uncle, maybe your dad, and no matter how badly it ran, it was part of your daily backdrop, parked at the curb, rattling down the road, or waiting in line at the drive-thru. The Vega was not just a car. It was a flawed dream on four wheels. Early cars were built tough, sometimes too tough. Without crumple zones, the body of the car was rigid and unforgiving, like a steel cage with no give. In a crash, all that force had to go somewhere, and more often than not, it went straight to the people inside. The logic at the time was that stronger cars were safer cars, but engineers eventually realized that a solid frame does not absorb energy. It transfers it. So in a head-on collision, instead of the car taking the hit, your body did. Bones broke, organs ruptured, and the impact felt like being thrown against a brick wall at full speed. For decades, automakers resisted changing the design. After all, who wanted a car that bent like a soda can? But safety experts argued that a car should collapse in a controlled way, using its structure to absorb the shock and protect its occupants. The turning point came in the 1960s, when crash tests showed just how deadly rigid frames could be. Slowly, crumple zones became part of the design, front and rear sections engineered to fold, bend, and deform in specific ways during a crash. The 1969 Dodge Charger Daytona was not built to be pretty, it was built to win. With its massive aerodynamic nose cone and towering rear wing, it looked like something out of a science fiction film. But every inch of it was designed for one purpose: dominate NASCAR. Just 503 were made to meet homologation requirements, and Dodge stuffed each one with a big V8 and a mission. At top speed, it was untouchable. The wing helped keep it glued to the track, and the pointed nose cut through the air like a missile. It was the first NASCAR car to break 200 miles per hour in competition. That made history. And the street version, just as wild. Dodge sold it to the public, knowing full well it would only appeal to the bravest buyers. It was long, it was loud, and it could not go anywhere without turning heads. But the Daytona was never meant for subtlety. It was meant to race, to win, and to stand apart. Today, it is one of the most iconic and rarest muscle cars ever built. A car that broke the rules, bent the wind, and left everything else behind in the dust. The 1971 Plymouth Cuda convertible did not whisper. It growled, snarled, and screamed its presence with every line and panel. This was not just a muscle car, it was an animal wrapped in sheet metal. With a low stance, bold stripes, and that aggressive shaker hood popping through the center, it looked like it was chewing its way out of the asphalt. Every curve had purpose, every vent was functional. The front end, with its quad headlights and mean grille, dared anyone to step aside. The convertible version was especially rare, with only a few hundred produced, making it one of the most sought-after Mopars of all time. Under the hood, you could find a range of monstrous V8 engines, none more feared than the 426 Hemi. Inside, the cockpit was driver-focused, with high-back bucket seats and rally gauges that made you feel like you were prepping for launch. It was brutal, beautiful, and unapologetically loud. Even at a standstill, it flexed muscle from every angle. And today, seeing one on the road feels like spotting a myth. Rare, wild, and unforgettable. The 1970 Dodge Coronet RT looked like a brawler, and it acted like one too. With its split grille that resembled a set of flared nostrils, it had one of the most aggressive faces of any car from the muscle era. This was not a car trying to charm you, it was daring you to challenge it. And under the hood, it had the muscle to back up that attitude. Most came with the 440 Magnum, but for those who wanted to push it, the mighty 426 Hemi was also an option. Either way, the Coronet RT was a straight-line menace. It was built for speed, with quarter-mile domination in its DNA. But what really made it stand out was its combination of menace and simplicity. No gimmicks, no cartoons, just a bold, brash machine that meant business. Inside, it was all muscle, basic gauges, tough materials, and a shifter ready for action. The Coronet RT may not have had the glamour of a Charger or the cult following of a Challenger, but it had respect. Lots of it. Today, it is a rare sight, but one that still turns heads and raises eyebrows, because real muscle does not need to be pretty, it just needs to hit hard. The 1980 Buick Skylark was part of the infamous X-Body lineup, and it inherited every one of the platform's notorious issues. Like its sibling, the Chevrolet Citation, the Skylark was meant to modernize General Motors' compact car offerings. Instead, it became a case study in rushed engineering. Steering problems were frequent and dangerous, with some models pulling to one side unpredictably. Rust was another major issue, especially in northern climates. The interior was cramped and filled with hard, brittle plastics that cracked under sunlight. Buick tried to dress the car up with better trim and branding, but the mechanical flaws ran deep. Customers complained about vibrations, loose panels, and cheap-feeling controls. And while the car was supposed to be economical, its real-world fuel economy often disappointed. It also lacked the smooth ride and comfort Buick had once been known for. The brand's older buyers were confused by the compact form. Younger buyers saw better options from Japan. The Skylark of 1980 failed to appeal to either group. It was a car that tried to be everything and ended up as almost nothing. General Motors had hoped it would be a flagship for the future. Instead, it became an embarrassing reminder of what happens when a company cuts corners. Suicide doors sound dramatic, and they were. Technically called rear hinge doors, they opened backward, with the hinges mounted on the trailing edge instead of the front. They were common in cars from the 1930s to the 1950s and made rear seat access feel grand, almost like stepping into a limousine. But they came with serious risk. If the latch failed, or worse, if the door was not fully closed, it could swing open while the car was in motion. The wind would catch the door like a sail, yanking it wide open and possibly pulling the rear passenger out with it. Seatbelts were rare in those days, so anyone sitting in the back was fully exposed if the door opened unexpectedly. Some models had locks, but they were mechanical and often unreliable. Even at low speeds, an open suicide door could cause a dangerous situation on city streets. At highway speeds, it was terrifying. The term suicide was not an exaggeration. It reflected real danger. Eventually, car makers phased out the design in favor of safer front-hinged doors. A few modern luxury cars have reintroduced rear-hinged doors, but only with advanced locking systems, sensors, and child safety features. Back then, though, it was just you, a handle, and the hope that nothing popped open mid-turn. The 1963 Chevrolet Impala Z11 was a drag strip assassin disguised as a family car. On the outside, it looked like a regular Impala, clean lines, long body, plenty of chrome, but this one came with a secret. Only 57 were ever built, and everyone was engineered to dominate straight-line racing. The Z11 package included aluminum fenders, hood, and bumper to save weight, and inside the engine bay sat a monstrous 427 cubic inch V8. It was built for one thing only: winning. Chevrolet stripped out the luxury and loaded in performance. No radio, no soundproofing. Just a factory hot rod wearing a Sunday suit. It was a response to Ford and Chrysler pushing harder into NHRA drag racing, and Chevrolet was not about to be left behind. The Z11 did not just compete, it cleaned house. Most of them were sold to professional racers who knew how to handle them, which is why so few have survived. They were used, abused, and pushed to the limit. Today, the Z11 is one of the rarest factory Chevrolets ever made and one of the most respected in racing history. It is living proof that sometimes the wildest muscle hides behind the quietest grille. The 1963 Chevrolet Corvette Stingray split-window coupe is what happens when a car becomes sculpture. Every curve was carved with intent, from the muscular fenders to the razor-sharp crease down the hood. But it was the split rear window that stole the show. Dividing the back glass with a spine of fiberglass, it gave the car an almost mythical silhouette, like something designed in secret by a team of fighter jet engineers and surfboard artists. It looked fast standing still, low to the ground with a poised, animal-like stance. Underneath that beauty was power. A small block V8 ready to launch. The dual exhausts sang a tune every gearhead still knows by heart. Inside, the cockpit felt like a jet. Round dials, bucket seats, and a dashboard that wrapped around you like armor. But the split window, as striking as it was, proved controversial. It restricted rear visibility, and by 1964, it was gone. Just 1 year. One design. One legendary moment in automotive design history. Today, that one-year-only coupe is among the most sought-after Corvettes ever built. Not just because of its rarity, but because it dares to ask, what if cars could be both machines and masterpieces? The 1971 Plymouth Roadrunner with the 446-barrel setup was a cartoon come to life, with claws. Everyone remembers the beep-beep horn, the playful badging, and the Looney Tunes reference. But behind the laughs was a serious machine that packed a punch. With a trio of two-barrel carburetors feeding the massive 440 cubic inch V8, this version of the Roadrunner had the kind of instant, pavement-tearing power that made your stomach drop. It was bare bones, loud, and proud. Everything about it screamed fun, but the kind of fun that left rubber burned into the road. The styling was sharp for 71, new body lines, a menacing grille, and that unmistakable air grabber hood. Inside, it was Spartan because luxury was not the point. This car was about sound, speed, and simplicity. It had a joy to it, like it wanted to be driven hard and rewarded those who did. The Roadrunner was the muscle car that did not take itself too seriously, and that is why people loved it. Today, it is remembered as a car that brought a grin to your face and a growl to your ears, delivering horsepower with humor. The 1983 Lincoln Continental Mark VI diesel was an answer to a question nobody asked. During the early 1980s oil crunch, Lincoln decided to offer a diesel version of its full-size luxury coupe. The result was predictably bizarre. Under the hood was a 5.7-liter V8 diesel borrowed from General Motors, and it sounded like a farm truck. Loud, slow, and unrefined. The acceleration was glacial. The engine shook the whole chassis, and the typical Lincoln smoothness was replaced with diesel rattle and hesitation. Worse, the engine itself was unreliable. Head gasket failures, cold start issues, poor longevity. Buyers expecting serene luxury were handed a car that felt like it belonged in a tractor pull. Inside, the plush velour seats and wood grain trim clashed with the constant growl of the diesel clatter. Fuel economy was only marginally better than a gas V8, and the performance sacrifice made it hard to justify. The diesel Mark VI was a novelty, and not a good one. It was dropped quietly, almost as if Lincoln hoped everyone would forget it ever existed. And for the most part, they did. It was not just a bad car, it was a bad idea. If these bizarre beauties made you raise an eyebrow or crack a smile, hit subscribe and tell us, what weird old ride would you dare to drive today?